David Rowan, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm looking forward to meeting human beings in carbon form.
Yes. Do you feel the ability is still there for you, or is it going to be very weird as you bump into them for the first time and say hello?
I'm going to take a few online courses on how to be social. I've lost some of those skills.
You point me in the right way when you find them. David, listen, you've always been someone who's every time I've listened to you, and I know all our audiences have listened to you over the years, you give us pointers what's going to happen in the future and what trends you're seeing and where we're heading. Like over the last year, from your perspective, has anything surprised you in terms of how we've evolved and where we've gone, or has everything just happened because it's sped up because of the pandemic?
I spend my time, Nick, with startups, with investors, with the people trying to build the future, taking risks, big risks on where things are going. And there's a couple of things that I got very excited about in the last year. First of all, when everything locked down, despite the sense of despair, there was an amazing flourishing of creativity. People who were connected to the network found other people and solved problems. And it started with various types of hackathons. Hey, we need ventilators. There aren't enough. Let's find a way to build a ventilator in an open source way. And people from South America joined with people in the Middle East, joined with people in Europe, and they were swapping ideas. And it was Slack channels, it was Google groups, it was Messenger. And then there was a series of creative, not just hackathons, but idea exchanges. And people were collectively, without a central set of controls, in a decentralized way, trying to design personal protective equipment, trying to unravel the structure of the COVID virus. There's an amazing project called Folding at Home, where they encourage everybody to connect their computer to this server, and they will use your unused computer processing capacity to help solve mathematical scientific problems. And in normal times, they were trying to understand how proteins worked. So 10,000 people would connect their computer, they would have decent processing power, and they would understand how proteins fold, which helps design medicines and stuff. At the peak, in about May last year, there were so many people who volunteered their computer that it became the world's biggest supercomputer. And they helped push forward scientific knowledge about the SARS-CoV virus. And it's beautiful that there is no central authority telling people what to do. The second thing that I got very excited about in the last year is a lot of people were reflecting on what they really want to do. And quite a bunch of very successful, driven entrepreneurs decided the biggest problem after COVID that's facing us is climate change. And they were coming together in all sorts of creative ways to try and decarbonize the world by setting up businesses. And I've got involved helping and making small investments in companies now that are trying to turn wood into biochar, because you can bury that for thousands of years and it takes an awful lot of carbon with it. I just got off a call with a team who were working with people who plant trees. Apparently, if you have all sorts of fungus under the root, it can encourage trees to grow more robustly. It can capture carbon. There are people working on nuclear fusion in this community I've helped create. And each of these in itself sounds impossible. And most of them are not going to succeed because that's what startups do. But collectively, they're going to build some of the biggest businesses in the world. Every company is going to have to become carbon accountable. Just as you have to have financial compliance, in the next 5 years, you're going to have carbon compliance. And it's the startups that are going to solve that problem.
So can I ask you your background? Obviously, you're an esteemed journalist, an editor of Wired and various other journals. How do you feel it's the world of tech is reported out in the press to us every day?
My background is I've always been a journalist since I was 7, making newspapers every day in the summer school holiday for my sister. I came up through newspapers. I was a trainee reporter at the Times. I spent 10 years editing things at The Guardian. I set up Wired magazine in the UK, which is the magazine that tells you where the world is going. And through Wired, I got to know the other side. I got to know the founders' stories. I got to know the people designing user experience, investing in the big companies like TransferWise that do change people's behavior. And there's a bias in traditional media, which is they are rooted in the last century's way of communicating information. And it's very hard for them to move as quickly as some of these startup people. And also there's a different sense of value. I keep seeing companies that are promising to use artificial intelligence to write the news. Even the concept is anathema to traditional media organizations. So they'll belittle it, they'll laugh at it. And sure, a lot of these companies are going to wither away. But if you belittle things that are going to be quite significant, autonomous cars are coming sooner rather than later. Automated ways we buy things, we get fed, wearables that tell us when we're going to have a heart attack, how we need to change our diet. These are coming to market much more quickly than we could have guessed a couple of years ago. And the old media mindset that sees them as either massively exciting but not something realistic, or an ethical threat to our way of living, often fails to understand the nuance. There are ethical questions in many of these new products, but if we don't engage in that conversation in an insightful way, then we're going to get left behind.
Whether it's in the world of media or other industries, kind of the long-established, entrenched businesses, are they going to adapt and change? Or are we going to see kind of something that I heard from many speakers probably now 5 to 10 years ago, the story of Blockbuster as the advent of Netflix, et cetera, came along? Are we going to see that seismic shift in other industries?
There's a wonderful trend happening at the moment, which is the talent is finding the audience without the intermediary. An awful lot of successful commentators, think tank bosses, journalists are building their own personal brand. And there are online channels like Substack, for instance, which makes it easier to manage a newsletter and take a fee. There are people going directly with their Instagram channels, with their YouTube, who would have previously needed an organization to represent them. And so the creator is having a golden era with trust as their main asset, and the consumer's willingness to pay to support somebody whose values, whose ideas, whose content they really care about. And that is a fundamental existential risk for the media organization, because in the old days, distribution was expensive. You needed a huge amount of revenue from advertising or from cover prices of magazines to make things work. What happens when distribution is not just free, but the crowd decides which individual rather than which organization matters? And I think I'm seeing this referred to as the creator economy. And it's not just in media storytelling, it's in people's ability to monetize any skill. There are platforms now that allow you to set yourself up as a personal shopper, and you develop a brand reputation through the ratings on the site, and you can start charging more than other people. This is an amazing opportunity for people who don't have conventional education, who don't have a conventional way to build a career. So I'm an optimist. I think the experimentation that we're just starting to see is going to boost economic growth, but it's also going to threaten legacy organizations that can't move fast.
Every time I speak to you, you open my eyes to all sorts of different sorts of things I should be thinking about and the way the world is moving. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks, Nick, and virtual fist bump or whatever we're allowed to do now.